One thing that you touched on is how do we guarantee that the AI is doing the right thing? And this is where I think the most important part of everything that we build is, which is our eval systems. So we have captured thousands of loads being moved, and we can use those loads to simulate the behaviors that are expected out of AI and create a simulated environment so that every change in SOP that we do, every new instruction that's added into the AI, we run hundreds of thousands of simulations of what the impact of those instructions are into the process to make sure that whatever we change doesn't create any regression. So it's a very symbiotic relationship there that we have.
Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of AI Without Borders. I'm thrilled to have Andre Martins, founder of Freight Hero, an AI company that fully manages freight brokers' back office operations. Andre was also previously co-founder of Velo, which was acquired in 2022, but most importantly for this podcast, Andre is originally from Brazil. Andre, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Love that. Very excited and start to the conversation.
So, Andre, a lot of people have talked lately about the service as the new software. Freight Hero thesis aligns very closely with this through the BPO approach. Can you share more of what Freight Hero is and why you decided that the BPO service approach was the best for the industry?
Absolutely. Well, Freight Hero thesis aligns perfectly with the services as software or AI native services company. Freight Hero is a service provider. We provide operations as a service for freight brokers. Freight brokerage being a segment of the US supply chain space. Now, for your audience, for those who are not familiar with freight brokers, let me give you a quick rundown of the industry. I'm sure at one point wasn't familiar with it. Most people don't know that over 25% of everything that moves by truck in the US is brokered, meaning that there is an intermediary between the transportation company and the shipper, whoever needs goods moved by trucks. And the responsibility of that broker is to find the right truck and to make sure that the truck or the trucking company actually executes the trucking services that are contracted. This is an industry that's highly operational. It's very manual. When you go to a brokerage office, what you see is guys my age with like 3 monitors and a headset, calling drivers all day long, pushing information between systems, Control-C, Control-V from PDF into systems. It's a lot of manual work. And this is an industry that we think can highly benefit from AI due to the margin constraints of the industry. It's been there's margin compression going on for years at this point. So they need a way to leverage and improve their margins. And lo and behold, now we have AI technology that's supposed to be this incredible margin leverage, but it's very hard to actually derive margin improvement from AI because it's a tough technology, right? It's very novel, it's very complex, it's hard to implement. And especially for an industry that's very traditional, such as freight brokerage. Now, we don't sell a tool, a piece of software that the brokers can use to drive margins. Instead, what we do is we actually execute the service for them and execute it in a faster way, in a cheaper way, thus selling the outcome of AI improvements by our model.
And related to that, there are other players in your industry, in your space that actually decided to take the software approach. Why you think the right approach in this case was to tell the outcome?
Yes, because again, from the profile of this technology, when I decided that I was going to build an AI company and that I wanted to get a lot of the learnings from my previous company that was also in the logistics space around where are there opportunities for automating processes with AI. I went into several of these industries and I spent some time working alongside freight brokers, living the life, boots on the ground, slinging freight, and then going out for dinner, going out drinking with the guys and kind of understanding the persona of the industry. And this is not an industry of people that are deep technology or tech savvy people. This is a very blue collar industry. These are people that their lives is moving freight. Their lives is not managing software. And this is a very difficult thing to do, is implementing AI software at scale in traditional organizations. Most pilots, they die in implementation hurdles or in change management difficulties. And that's the difficulty of trying to sell AI technology into the industry. Now, what we've identified is that this is also an industry that already does a lot of outsourcing. There is a high prevalence of BPOs, business process outsourcing companies, services, selling basically operational services for this industry, and that we have the opportunity to build the better version of this model, which is AI actually executing most of the work, but also having a human in the loop on our side. We call this team the heroes that are executing the work, whatever the AI is not prepared to deal with yet. So we solve something that's more valuable and something that's akin to a model that the industry, the brokers, are already used to buying. And we tap into that muscle memory that already exists.
I think avoiding that change management in those traditional industries is definitely a very smart approach. But as you were mentioning, like these players already use BPOs. Like, what is the story? Like, what is the challenge that they're having today with the BPOs that opens the opportunity for you and come and replace one of them with your solution?
Well, the BPO model is a tricky one. It is a way to bend the cost curve because you're replacing expensive labor with cheaper labor as you outsource the work to a third party that provides that cheap labor. But there are fundamental misalignments of incentives between the BPO company and the company that buys services from the BPO. If the business model is selling what we call butts on the seat, or selling human beings executing the work with a fixed cost, which is normally what the BPO industry sells to our industry, what is the incentive that the BPO company has to make the processes or the operations more efficient? If the processes get more efficient, you have less human beings, thus you have less revenue from one single customer. So that misalignment of incentives is pretty substantial. And what we normally see is operations teams without brokers that are outsourced bloating over time, increasing in size over time instead of reducing over time. The other major point is turnover. Now, you and me, we're both Latin American and or both understand that there is tremendous capacity for Latin American people to be involved in operations and driving a lot of value. But when you go into the outsourcing direction, normally what happens is the companies outsource the lower value tasks. And if you're limited by a salary that doesn't move because that's the price point of what you're selling, and you're only executing manual tasks, you're going to be seeking something else. So turnover in the BPO industry ranges around 30 to 40% per year. So there's a lot of hidden costs with this model for the brokers because the human beings that they are hiring through the BPO model are being replaced over time and have to be retrained. And there's a curve for them to be reaching potential. There's management complexity that comes with it. So it is a model that brought to the brokers what they needed, which is reducing their operational costs, but at a high complexity and high costs that are kind of hidden, which are all the things that we do away with our model by doing most of the work with AI, and the humans in the loop that are involved into it are trained from the ground up to work side by side with AI and to retrain the AI over time so that it's a positive association between the human and the AI as things progress, and not a negative one where AI is replacing the work that the human being is doing, thus replacing the human. It's actually augmenting and increasing the capacity of the human being in the loop. So we do away with all of the hurdles of the BPO industry.
And the strategy seems to be working. And you also have some very exciting news to share this week.
Yeah, absolutely. So we launched the business back in March last year. Had our first customer on board in September last year. And since then, we've been growing tremendously, like over 80% month over month in load count, and have already managed over 40,000 loads end to end with this hybrid model of humans plus AI. And due to all that, due to us seeing all of this working, and having a lot of acceptance in the model, we went for fundraising, and happy to announce that we closed a $5 million seed round led by Field Ventures and with participation of Flybridge Capital. Thank you very much for that. And also Tip Top VC and Front Porch Venture Partners. So super excited about that.
No, super excited to be partnering with you. And yeah, it was to all the points that we've been speaking about. It was clear from the customer conversations, from the industry experts, everything that you were saying about the misaligned incentives on the BPO side and how easy you really make to adopt this technology. And speaking of technology and going back to the business, one of the key things that you don't want is that your load gets lost as a result of putting AI and having AI hallucinating. How do you guarantee that the AI is going to do what it's supposed to do, especially when there are so many SOPs? And there's also a great opportunity for the people who are not from the industry to explain what the SOPs are and how it's such a big challenge from a tech perspective as you embed AI.
Yes, absolutely. And let me first actually take a step back and explain how it works, because it's an interesting vision of having AI working side by side with humans, but how to actually operationalize that, I think that's the most important thing. So we built an AI system an agentic AI system that we personify as Robin. Robin is the sidekick to the freight heroes. And Robin is deeply embedded into the tech stack that our customers, the freight brokers themselves, are utilizing. So it's connected to the system of records. It's connecting to their communication systems, Teams, Slack, email, SMS, voice over IP for phone calls. It's connecting to tracking systems, connecting to several other systems that are part of the broker back office. So basically, we embed our agents into the back office or embed Robin into the back office. And once it's there, it needs instructions, right? And that is where the SOPs come from. When you go into like transportation or into heavily operational industries, there's something called SOPs, standard operational procedures, which kind of dictates how a human should execute the work in order to achieve an objective, right? It's a way to standardize a process. And Robin is prepared to receive SOPs whilst also being connected to all of the systems and react to signals in order to execute those SOPs and follow procedures. Now, what has been very interesting for this industry is that I naively expected that once we created this, that we were going to go into a freight brokerage and say, hey, send me your SOPs, send me your standardized operational procedures. We'll translate it to our AI and teach our AI how to execute them. And then we'll do the work on your behalf. And the response to that question is, we don't have standardized operational procedures. A lot of the knowledge about what needs to be done in specific situation is tribal knowledge, is in the minds of the people that are operating freight. So what we did instead of asking for those procedures is we created a standardized procedure for tracking loads, for managing loads end to end, which is the processes that we're executing for our customers. And we go live with this more standardized process that naturally puts us in contact with situations that bring light into what the nuances are of the freight that we're moving. There's a specific customer here that requires an update of this format sent to this email, and we didn't train the AI or create the specific procedures for the AI to do that. At that moment, that is when a hero jumps in. One of our human operators is instructed to execute that, and once we have that execution being done through our systems, through the interface with our AI systems, that is how we're creating knowledge that then gets imparted into the AI. So next time this happens, the AI knows what to do and it can execute that. Now, one thing that you touched on that I think is very important is, how do we guarantee that the AI is doing the right thing? How do we guarantee that it's not hallucinating? And this is where I think the most important, albeit invisible part of everything that we build is, which is our eval systems. So we have captured now thousands of transactions, thousands of loads being moved that happen through our system. And we can use those loads to simulate the behaviors that are expected out of AI and create a simulated environment so that everything that we do, every change in SOP that we do, every new instruction that's added into the AI, we run hundreds of thousands of simulations of what the impact of those instructions are into the process to make sure that whatever we change doesn't create any regression. And this is a process that runs constantly, and we can have the heroes being notified if the AI is behaving in a way that's not expected so that they can intervene and jump in. So it's a very symbiotic relationship there that we have, where the humans are executing the things that the AI don't know what to do. They're essentially teaching the AI by doing it, and they are now the overseers of the work that the AI is doing, and also being in the loop to receive any situations that are novel. So this is a very neat way to organize that and to be able to provide a quality service for our customers while still guaranteeing that we have a very efficient operation in our hands.
No, that definitely shows the advantage of that kind of hybrid human AI in the loop. But at the same time, one of the criticisms that sometimes the service as software model has received is that it's a historically industry with low margins. How do you think about that challenge personally as you think about scaling the business?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is the difference between an AI native services company or a services software company versus a service company with AI slapped on it. As the margins is how much can you actually derive, how much AI can actually do from the work that needs to be done versus the human being in the loop. And that's why this symbiotic relationship where we're learning from what the AI is doing is so important, because it's creating two very important engines for margin leverage in our hands. Like if you look at our COGS as a company, our cost of goods sold, it's basically inference costs, so the cost of running our AI services, and then the cost of the hero team, right? Inference costs, they have been going down tremendously. We're being now improving the model usage so that we're reaching benefits from that. So there is a very tangible price per load or cost per load that derives from the token usage versus the cost per token on that specific load. That is a clear engine for optimization that we have in our hands. And on the other hand, we have the hero team. And there is a super simple metric that we can follow very closely to determine what is what is the cost of that team per load, which is how many times or how many touches does a hero need to do on a load on average, multiplied by what is the time per touch for every single touch or every single intervention that is necessary. And I'm super happy to say that throughout this journey that we've had since we launched the company, we went from about 8 to 9 touches per load on average from the heroes where we launched to close to 1, and are still decreasing, which means that as we learn from the process and as we further automate it, the heroes are doing less and less touches, and we're now working on enablement features that are accelerating each touch, helping draft emails faster for the hero, or helping surface information quicker so he doesn't have to look at a lot of history before committing to a work. So that we're actually now tackling the time per touch metric. And all of this combined brings us to a potential gross margins that we expect to reach next year that approaches the gross margins of software. So very clear engines and very driven by technology. And this can only be done by something that is born from the ground up as an AI native services company, which assumes that AI is going to be doing most of the work from the ground up and being built that way.
One of the other things that was very attractive was the why now on the technology convergence, because as you think about a load management, it's not really just text, it's also other modalities like voice. And maybe you can share a couple examples where 2 years ago you couldn't have been able to make it.
Yep. And I'll actually go back to my previous company and kind of use a little example. My previous company, we were doing deliveries using a network of independent drivers. So it's kind of an Uber model, but for parcel deliveries for last mile. We had a team internally called the control tower team. That team's responsibility was overseeing the operations and guaranteeing that the operations was flowing as planned, which is a very fancy way to describe a team that was basically calling drivers all day long to make sure that the drivers were where they were supposed to be. That was very manual and very hard to automate. And I spent years trying to automate away that process because it's a very low value process, and I didn't want to burden my operations team with something that's so low value. We hit a wall with the technology of the time. There was a limit to how much we could automate from the process because, the drivers, they don't communicate through structured communications methods. They communicate through WhatsApp, through SMS messages. Sometimes not even that. Sometimes you need to actually make a phone call. So back then, it wouldn't have been possible to fully automate away the work of the control tower team. Now it's essentially what we're doing at Free Hero is we're automating away most of the work from the control tower team. And having the hero team, as we call it in this new company, only doing the exception management, only working with things that actually required a human being in the loop. Technology had to change for that. We had to break through the barriers that only agentic AI was able to break through in increasing the level of automation that we could build into the processes that we were tackling. Before launching Free Hero, we tested it tremendously. We created a lot of prototypes to see if we were at a point with technology that we could really create enough automation to make this business model works, to make sure that the human in the loop was only involved at maturity with exception handling, with situations that actually require a human in the loop, that require judgment, that require analysis, that require data discrepancy, that requires us to validate where the data is coming from and correct previous human works that are associated with the load. That is what the hero team is doing, and not just making phone calls. So yeah, there was a lot that needed to be improved and implemented in order for us to reach this point.
And as much as the technology and capabilities have improved a lot, like we see across industries that there's still certain types of cases that are still needed to be handled by human. Are there any commonalities or patterns on the edge cases that even today with the very smart models, the AI cannot handle and you really need a human for where you're seeing models fail?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it has to do with the data that arrives to the AI. The AI system that you build is only as good as the signals or the data that is arriving to it. One very common thing that happens in the type of freight that we're moving is we have telemetry. We see the truck driver, we see his position, but sometimes because somebody just put the wrong driver information on the load, or the carrier company decide to send driver B instead of driver A to actually pick up that load, we're actually tracking the wrong driver. Now, how do we teach an AI an AI system, an agentic AI that is instructed to communicate with the driver and look at the driver information and assess risk? How do we teach it that there is a possibility that this is not the right driver? So you have to go and fetch the information from the right driver, and maybe it is the right driver, and the load is actually delayed because the driver is moving in the wrong direction or the driver is finishing his previous work. This is all very complicated for an agentic system. And in situations like that, it is where the AI basically asks for help and calls upon a hero that can then jump in and basically understand and understand the situation and correct the situation. So the human is able to determine, is this the real driver? Call the driver, talk to him, call the dispatcher, talk to him. If it's a delay, talk to the broker and actually resolve that situation before it even hits the broker, before you require that from their team. If this was just an AI software, if we were selling an AI tool, that work of disentangling this mess of data that was incorrectly inputted, that would have come back to the broker himself. That would have come back to the user of the software. And if the data quality is not high when it hits the software, you're sometimes creating more work for the user than it would have been for the user to just do it without software in the first place. And that's actually what we saw a lot, or we heard a lot from people like, oh, we implemented this AI system. It works 80% of the time, but then the 20% of the time that it doesn't work, it creates more work for us to solve those 20% than if we just ran 100% of the process. That is how our model kind of does away with that, because we take over 100% of the process. Regardless if AI solves 90, 95, or 98%, we take over 100% of the process, and it's our responsibility to make sure that the AI is as efficient as possible. And that's how we align incentives into this model.
And we've been speaking likely several of these points throughout the conversation, but did wanted to ask you if you have any advice for both founders and investors who are looking at building companies with that service as software thesis, or like either factors that you think the industry has to have, things that are obvious to you now, but when you started wearing that you had to learn a bit.
Well, and I think this is a great moment to talk about something that for a long time people forgot about or didn't pay that much attention, which is unit economics. To run a service, a software, or an AI native services company, you have to actually focus a lot on unit economics. And a SaaS founder that created a SaaS product in the past, or a SaaS investor that is only focused on investing in SaaS company, especially during the ZERP era, this is something that wasn't discussed too much. Margins. People talk a lot about revenue, but not enough about margins. For this business to work, we need to focus a lot on margins. Now, I come from an operations background. This company was highly operational, so we were always very focused on unit economics. We knew how to measure operations. We knew how to deploy processes that improve operations and how to leverage technology to make the operations number better. And this is an important muscle for a founder to have if they're going to venture into an AI native services company. It's easier in a way to guarantee high margins with software because it's fully replicable. So the unit of an additional unit of revenue doesn't require as much additional unit of work. It is different for a service business, so it requires a different type of founder and a different team structure. For example, there's a very different profile between a COO of a SaaS company versus a COO of a company like ours. A COO of a company like ours has to be deep operations, have to come from the industry, have to understand processes, have to extract data, and have to understand how to drive operational efficiency from technology. That is a muscle that not everyone has.
No, I 100% agree. And one of the things that we liked about the business was exactly that, the focus that the company had. You could see the history of where the margins started to where they were, and also very clear roadmap on the levers that you can pull to keep improving them over time. So I think that's a great point. And speaking of very important decisions for any vertical solution, one of the core decisions that a founder has to make in the early days is what's going to be my wedge? What's going to be my wedge use case that I'm going with? In your case, you started with load management, but you could have easily started with quoting, carrier sales, billing, or any other module.
Yeah.
Why did you decide that in this specific industry, load management was the right place to start?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. And this is a question that we spent a lot of time thinking about before we actually launched Free Hero. When I went into brokerages, when I mapped the processes, when I lived through the lives, I was making the question to myself, like, where is the best way for us to start? And let me define load management before, so that your audience knows like exactly what Free Hero is doing. Like after a broker closes a deal with a carrier, after you already know how much it's going to cost for you to move the freight and know who is going to be using the freight, somebody has to monitor the execution of the freight. This is the process that we do. We call it load management. Some people call it track and trace. It's basically following the driver's execution of the work through the systems that we have at our disposal and through communicating with the carrier to ensure that the carrier actually executes it in accordance to what was contracted. Namely, it's babysitting truck drivers. It's making sure that the truck drivers are going to arrive on time and depart on time, and they're picking up the right things and delivering the right things, and the documentation reflects that. That is, first of all, it's a very hard process because this is where the most number of exceptions around the freight management process lies. This is where a truck driver just falls off the map in terms of tracking. We don't know where they are. This is where the truck breaks down. This is where there is a climate event. This is where there's traffic that we weren't expecting. This is where there are so many stories that I can share about like freight management that are normally involved not when you're pricing or when you're billing freight, but when the freight is actually being executed. And I'll tell you a very quick story that's true that happened when I was shadowing process for the first time that I think kind of shine a light on that. I saw a broker dealing with a situation where one of his drivers attempted to enter a secured facility. I think it was a government facility, and the driver had a gun under his seat. He didn't tell anybody about it and just, thought it was going to be okay. Of course, it's being a government facility, the truck was searched and they found the gun. Then all hell broke loose. They apprehended the guy. They, handcuffed the guy at one point. And then, of course, the broker received a very nasty phone call about like, what's going on here? Why does this driver bring a gun? And all hell broke loose, basically. What the broker had to do in that situation was very humane. They had to empathize. They had to negotiate. They had to apologize. Those are very humane things that happened here in the middle. And this is why I think this was the right process to start a business model that has AI plus humans, because just AI cannot fully automate this process. You need a human in the loop. There are situations where the driver just doesn't want to talk to an AI and doesn't want to message or email an AI platform. He needs a human being to call him and say, hey, is everything okay? He needs to hear a human voice, basically. And that empathy sometimes is necessary throughout this process. So we started by the most complicated process that has the highest number of exceptions, but also has low value add work that is repeatable, that needs to be done over time. So it's the perfect model for the type of solution that we're bringing in. In addition to that, this is the first process that brokers outsource when they go in the outsourcing direction. So there's already the muscle memory in this industry of outsourcing this work to a third party because this is perceived as not the highest value add for the company. So it's high touch, a lot of exceptions, high cost of mistake, and also a precedence for outsourcing. So that became the perfect kind of process for us to land into our brokers and take over that entire process on their behalf and execute it better than they could execute it themselves for a cheaper price. And it's also variable, not a fixed cost. That's the first step. And this is what we call kind of our Trojan horse, where once we're into their organizations, it gets easier for us to see what other processes are inside the organizations that we could expand our model into, and then start growing horizontally within the brokerage, which is the next steps for Freight Hero. So naturally, if we're already managing freight, we know what the exceptions are. So if we know what the exceptions are, we know what exceptions are going to create billing exceptions. Where a driver is going to request more money because they got tied down for 3 hours in pickup instead of the agreed upon or contracted 2 hours. We already have that information. So going into billing exceptions is something that we can do easily because we already have the awareness and the knowledge of what happened in freight. And same thing upstreams. We understand carrier behavior, so we can help brokers select better carriers, understand their behaviors, build loads better, and there's opportunities for us to grow into several different directions inside of a broker's back office.
And related to that future roadmap, what do you think brokerage industry looks like if Freight Hero is able to achieve its vision?
Yeah, I love to kind of go deep and understand even the history of the industries that I'm kind of tackling and dealing with. So I went pretty deep when I was researching brokerage. I wanted to understand, where does this industry come from? Why is this industry so big in the US? And basically, brokerage was created as an industry in the 80s, mostly from the deregulation of trucking in the US. Exploded the number of trucking companies, so it required a human in the loop there, an intermediary there between the brokers, between the carriers and the shippers, to actually add that layer of trust to the shippers. The shippers are not going to trust just any truck driver, but they can trust a intermediary that is someone that they know, that is someone they have a relationship with, and that's someone that guarantees that a truck will be there. So the industry was born in the 80s as a very sales-heavy organization that was selling trust. And I think that over the past, 20, 30 years, this industry has being pushed more and more into operations and less into sales because of the nature of the work that's required, because of the nature of systems, because of the changing in the industry format. And I think there's an opportunity now for brokerage to go back to its origins, for Freight Hero to take over most of the operational work and provide that trust that actually, yes, the truck's going to be there because we are monitoring it. We're monitoring very closely. We're guaranteeing that you have the best drivers. We're seeing who the drivers is. We're understanding their behaviors. We're helping you source the best drivers and following those and helping those drivers to achieve their objectives without touching too much of your organization. So brokers can get the resources back that they were putting into operations and get those resources back into sales where they should have been in the first place. Because this is what differentiates broker to broker, is their capacity to sell, their capacity to grow their revenue without growing their operational headcount. And this is what Free Hero will allow.
No, definitely. And with that, Andre, I really enjoyed the conversation. Super excited to be with you on this journey. And hopefully when we catch up in a couple years with a new episode, you have already reshaped part of the industry.
Absolutely. We're getting there.
Great
Thank you,
having
Daniel.
you.
Appreciate it.